Hello everyone and welcome to the first game we'll be showing from the Speed Chess Championship quarterfinals. It's Magnus Carlsen versus Fabiano Caruana. It is one of the formats where Fabi is actually higher rated than Magnus Carlsen, and we've seen it in the previous video. If you didn't see it, you can see that Nakamura is already in the semifinals facing Nihal Sarin, and in the quarterfinals we have Magnus versus Caruana, and Wesley So will be facing Maxime Vachier-Lagrave to see who will join them in the semifinals. Now, this is the first game of the match. It just finished, and I didn't think I'd be showing it so quickly, but I do have time before the Croatia-Argentina match, so decided to do it, as it is a very nice one. So let's dive straight into it. Magnus has the white pieces, and he opens with pawn to d4. We have knight to f6 by Fabi, pawn to c4, e6, knight to c3, and bishop to b4. Going for the Nimzo Indian defense, we have queen to c2, and now Fabi castles. So the classical variation of the Nimzo, a3, bishop captures, and now you don't have to mess up your pawn structure. You can capture with the queen. Pawn to d5, we have c captures on d5, and now knight to e4 first. This is very rare and very interesting, but Magnus has faced it once. He played it in 2009 against Vladimir Kramnik in the Tal Memorial. The game ended in a draw, and we'll be following that game for quite some time up until move 12. So queen to c2, moving the queen back, e captures on d5, and now bishop to f4, with the threat of capturing on c7, so nicely developing the bishop with tempo. Knight to c6, and now pawn to e3, defending the d4 pawn. We have rook e8, knight to f3, and now in the style of Kramnik himself, as he also likes to do this, pawn to g5. Attacking the bishop here, we have bishop to g3, and now in that game that we mentioned from the Tal Memorial 2009, Kramnik played g4 right away, but Fabi prepares it with pawn to h5. And now there is one game where knight to e5 was played, but here Magnus just goes for the developing bishop to d3, and it is now as of move 13 that we have a completely new game. So pawn to h4, continuing to harass Magnus's bishop. Bishop to e5, and now bishop to f5, first adding a defender to the e4 knight before deciding whether or not to capture the bishop on e5. But it's such a beautiful bishop, of course you will capture it. We have pawn to h3, stopping any further advancements, and now knight captures on e5. We have d captures on e5, and here queen to e7, and queen to e7 is the first move. Basically, up until this point everyone played the first engine move, but here Fabi goes for the third engine move. The first one is c5, which is very interesting, and also it's very interesting how Magnus replies to queen to e7. So here we have queen to e7, and Magnus immediately goes for pawn to b4, stopping what was basically the engine's first recommendation, and that is pawn to c5. So okay, Fabi prepares it, rook 8 to c8, and Magnus castles. We have bishop back to g6, and now rook 8 to c1. As the first file to open up is probably going to be the C file, it makes sense to double or even triple up if possible on the C file. Pawn to C6. Fabi doesn't want to go for the immediate C5. It's always an option, so first pawn to C6. We have rook F to E1, and now pawn to B6. We have knight to H2. And now Magnus has left his e5 pawn defenseless, and Fabi should think twice before capturing it, but he goes for it. Queen captures on e5, and the idea is that now pawn to f3 will dislodge the knight, and Magnus will capture on g6. But okay, Fabi can always go back. He's gonna be able to trade queens, but Magnus saw something else, as he will be winning the c6 pawn. So knight to g3 by Fabi. We have bishop captures on g6, f captures, and queen captures with check. We have queen to g7, and now the move that Magnus played very nicely, rook captures on c6. And it's a very nice trick because you cannot capture on c6, otherwise queen captures on e8 with check will pick up the other rook as well. So instead, after rook captures on c6, just queen captures on g6, we have rook captures on g6, king f7, and now Magnus gobbles up another pawn. Rook captures on g5, and now it's 6 pawns Magnus, 4 points Fabi, but Fabi does have the d4 move, which sort of equalizes the game. White is a little bit better, but nothing spectacular. Knight to g4 by Magnus, now saying, okay, you can capture on e3, but if you capture on e3, then I have some knight to e5 check ideas, maybe king f6, f4, creating a very, very complicated game, which would be the best course of action for Fabi, in fact. But instead, Fabi plays rook to c3, and now Magnus advances his pawn to e4. Rook e5 is also a very nice move, but okay, it's a blitz game. Pawn to e4, we have rook to d8, now getting ready to advance the passed d pawn, and Magnus starts advancing the passed e pawn. And here we have rook to c6 by Fabi, guarding that e6 square. But this move also loses the game completely for Fabi, but it's not easy to spot why. So feel free to pause the video and try to find the absolute best move for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting the move. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is of course pawn to b5, which would not be possible. I'm sure you know what I was about to say, but yes, pawn to b5. And the problem is there is no good square, and once you move the rook from the 6th rank, e6 check will be devastating. To give you a few examples, let's say rook to g6. You want to trade rooks? Not a problem. Just rook captures, king captures, and pawn to e6. You're going to play rook e8 or something, doesn't really matter. King f2, and now after because the knight and pawn now cover the f6 and f7 squares, the king cannot approach the pawn. So how do you play this? You can go king g7, now rook to e5, and if let's say king f8, you want to blockade the pawn, knight to f6, attacks the rook, let's say rook e7, knight d5, and after something like rook e8, e7 with check, and that's it. There's no playing this with black because the pawn here is immortal, you can never reach it, the king cannot enter the game, the rook and the knight cover the e6 and f6 squares, so the king and rook are absolutely useless in this game. And another thing, if you don't go rook to g6, if you try blockading with rook to e6, then f4 with f5 next, and that's all there is. Let's say d3, f5, you're gonna move the rook. Now look at this, knight h6 check, king f8, and now everything is forced. The rook g8 check, king e7, rook to g7 check, only move king to f8, and now of course rook to f7 will be checkmate. So absolutely devastating. However, Magnus missed it, b5. Absolutely crushing. He started with f4, which is still fine, but now Fabi can easily equalize. Pawn to d3, pawn to f5, and pawn to d2. As you can see, this is much, much faster for black. We have pawn to e6 with check, king to e7, and now rook to g7 check. King to d6 and rook to d1, necessary to stop the advancement of the passed d pawn. Rook to c1, trying to force a rook trade to get the queen into the game, but Magnus has the only move that saves him, and that is knight to e3, defending the rook here, and Fabi's best choice is to capture the rook. If he does this, let's say knight captures on f5, he's perfectly fine here. Let's say rook d7 check, Magnus will have nothing better either than to trade everything, and then you just pick up this pawn and you enjoy a game. You're up a pawn, but nothing too serious. So instead, Fabi played king to e5, and now he gives Magnus the advantage. He needed rook to d7, trying to force a rook trade, but if you don't, then just rook captures on d2, and even if you go for rook captures on d1 check, knight captures on d1, it's not much better. You can't trade because the pawn is then unstoppable, and if you just move the rook, again, nothing to it. Just knight to e3, the d1 square is covered, so you don't really care, and that's it. If rook to c1 with check, you're gonna play king to f2, and you don't mind any d1 checking ideas because both the rook and the knight cover this square, so black is out of options here. So rook d to c8 was played, trying to keep everything in the game, but now Magnus just picks up the rook on d2. Rook captures on d2, king to e4 attacks the knight, king to f2. We have knight captures on f5, rook captures on c1, we have rook captures on c1, and now knight captures on f5. King captures, and of course the pawn is now unstoppable. We have pawn to e7, as the e1 square is covered, Fabi goes rook to c8, and now rook to d8. Magnus forces resignation, and he was in this position on move 43 that Fabi resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. You either trade and then white gets a queen into the game, or you do nothing, move the rook somewhere. You can give a few checks, but doesn't really matter. Once that is finished, next move, Magnus will bring a queen into the game. So yeah, very nicely done by Magnus, winning the first game. We'll see what happens in the other games, but as today Croatia is playing Argentina, I will be watching that, so it's hard to say when I will show the next game from the match, as if we do well, some celebrations will be in order, so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, very nicely done by Magnus in the first game. Fabi played it well, he surprised Magnus, but it would seem that Magnus did quite okay, and it could have gone either way, but in no situation did Fabi get like the upper hand or anything. It was either equal or Magnus was just better or straight out winning, and especially in this position after rook to c6, where he had the win with pawn to b5, which you guys no doubt have found. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. The first game we'll be showing from the Speed Chess Championship quarterfinal match between Magnus and Fabiano. Should be a nice one. I would like to thank Logan Dobe, Jeff Graves, Francis, Sarah, Benjamin, Richie, and Timothy Rosan for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.